there we go. This meeting is being recorded, so hopefully that's okay with you all. If you don't want to be seen, obviously hide yourselves. If you could introduce yourselves in the chat, and if you've got any questions as we go along, which we'll be handling in 2 blocks, then please put them in the chat and I'll hopefully pick those up and put those to the appropriate presenters. Unless you're speaking, perhaps you could put yourself on mute as well, just in case there are any noisy dogs or children in the background, which always adds a bit of something to these meetings. By way of introduction, I don't know if anyone saw the programme last night with Chris Packham. Any hands up? Yeah, I thought it was wonderful. I don't know if you agree, Rob and Karen.
Absolutely.
Well worth a look on the iPlayer. It's on BBC Two, and it's Chris Packham's The Walk That Made Me, it was called. An hour-long programme, and basically he retraced his childhood steps along the River Itchen in Hampshire. But it was much more than that, and the reason why I mention it is because it really touched on a lot of the dimensions, I suppose, that we're probably going to be hearing about this evening. Different aspects, if you like, of walking that actually enhance the whole experience. He was certainly remembering some very important memories, some very painful memories on his walk. He interacted with nature, he listened and he watched. He connected with people who were connected with nature in other ways, wild swimmers as an example. He conversed with people on the route. He looked at historical sites along the way. He listened to trains going over and a whole range of things. So it was a really rich experience, and I felt a really joyful and quite moving actually programme. So I would strongly recommend it if you get a chance. Look on the iPlayer, Chris Packham, The Walk That Made Me. So that's really what we're about this evening. It's about, I suppose, exploring walking, but walking not just as a basic exercise, but walking that can be enhanced or enriched in some ways, made more meaningful, more beneficial in terms of health and well-being. We've got a number of, I think, very interesting contributors this evening. Good evening, Andrew. Good to see you. In the car by the looks of it as well. That's interesting. Just about to go for a walk, I guess. And without further ado, we'll, I think, launch off with Sarah, who's rather gloomily in her screen there. You might have to wave, I think, Sarah, or yeah, you are still alive. Jolly good. Sarah, who I found out Sarah a little earlier on when I was checking my email. We met nearly a year to the day. Did you remember that?
Was it really that long ago?
We've only met online. We haven't met face to face yet, for God's sake. So
you never know. We might actually meet in nature. Wouldn't that be nice?
Sarah, obviously you can say a bit more about yourself, but I think Sarah, the easiest way to say you're a researcher at the University of East Anglia. You're very interested in green care and nature connection as a topic of research, and I believe you have taken a particular interest in walking. And for those of you that had the email, you should have all had the email. You have seen there was a digest of a number of research papers, many of which Sarah had been involved with in some way. And Sarah, you're going to give us an introduction to the afternoon, really, and I guess highlight the importance of walking. So over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, it needs to be on slideshow. Yeah, that's fine. You're in. That's it. Brilliant. Well done.
That's great. And am I looking at the screen? I've got 2 screens. I'm never quite sure where they pop up, but I'm in black anyway, so you probably can't see me, can you? Is that all right? Can you hear me and see me okay?
We can see you and hear you, I think, yeah.
That's brilliant. So, I mean, I've got 10 minutes, which is nothing really, is it, to talk about why walking is important. And I mean, there's so many different ways that I could have taken this, but I'm sort of mindful of the other speakers that come along, and hopefully this will nicely segue into the work that they're going to do. So I'm based at the UEA. I'm a health researcher, and I've been involved in doing work with walking now since 2012, I think it is. So a long way back. That's me on Twitter, so if you wanted to connect with me afterwards, that would also be great. So I'm just going to, in 10 minutes, talk to you why walking is important. And that might be, I sometimes talk of myself as doing the science of the bleedingly obvious, because I think everybody I'm talking to on here will sort of intuitively think that walking is good for you. But we've got this lovely quote from Hippocrates right back in the day, about the right amount of exercise and nourishment as well, and about health. And I'm sure that's a quote you might have seen before. So that's 2,000 years ago, and yet it took us till 1953 for Jerry Morris's work for us to appreciate the importance of physical activity. So just in case you're not familiar with this work, this was really pivotal work. Before that, all of us involved in health really thought that it was important to rest. Sedentary behaviour was thought to be good. People doing manual work were thought to be much more at risk for being, it's better to do a desk job, and actually the rest was actually beneficial. So this was work back on the buses that Jerry Morris looked at. Actually started off looking at cardiovascular disease, and he started actually looking in the morgue and looking at hearts of people who had died. And what he found is that, you look at these two populations here, they're both men, they're both of a similar age, they're both the same socioeconomics, but one sits driving a bus and one is the bus conductor that is moving up and down the steps, and really recognise the real importance of physical activity. And then he repeated this in the Whitehall study, looking at civil servants and people and postmen. It was mostly postmen at the time, and found exactly the same. But just remind ourselves, this is 1953, and this paper was extremely difficult to publish. Believe that being physically active could reduce, and that might come as a real surprise to you. Me working now in hospitals as well, trying to get patients more physically active, we still come up against this whole thing that bed rest and rest is best. So this is really giving you the context around physical activity, not just walking, and I'll come on to why walking is an important component of that. But these two graphics really come from after the Olympics in 2012. Interestingly, the Olympics was in an area of high deprivation and one of the pockets of the poorest levels of physical activity in the country. And it's fair to say there has been no ongoing legacy of better physical activity after the Olympics. So this paper by, you've got the two references there, and I'll supply it afterwards. You can look at the hyperlinks. But if you just look at the graphic on the left here, the blue is, you can see the downward curve of people having physical activity through domestic activity. So we've engineered out a lot of things you'd do in the home that would keep you physically active. The above is occupational, so most work doesn't involve physical activity. Above that is physical activity for transport, so walking and cycling. Exercise and sports are on the down, and the only thing that's up is sitting. And on the right, you can see this nice graphic again that we look at here, over 5 million deaths worldwide from physical inactivity. And actually we focus so much on smoking, and in many ways smoking is a public health problem. We've kind of got quite well under control, except for some populations, through legislation, but physical inactivity really remains the problem we're most concerned about worldwide. And the work we've done here at UEA and in other places worldwide, we're already on a slide for this before COVID, and certainly things haven't got better. So it is important. I mean, I'll skip through this slide quite quickly because walking is one component of the things that we can do. So I think what I want to just get over in this slide, it's never too late to take up physical activity or to change health behaviours, because you can actually slow down how we age. And some of these findings were based on EPIC, which is a Norfolk cohort study. It's based around cancer, but it looks at people's behaviours and how they affect their health. And they could find people who engaged in all 5 of the government recommended guidelines who actually have an equivalent of being 14 years younger. So let's get to why walking is so important then. Well, I mean, walking is a very natural thing to do, believe it or not, because you wouldn't believe it if you saw how little of it we actually did. Engages over half your body's muscle mass. What's interesting, of course, if you're very unfit or if you're very overweight, then actually walking can actually be moderate to vigorous physical activity. For people who are very fit, then you might feel like you're not expending much energy, but for people who are unfit, actually a walk can feel like very hard work. And what's important about it? Well, walking, it affects your lipids, so your blood fats, your blood pressure, so all of these physiological effects on your body, vascular function, your body composition, musculoskeletal. We know that actually weight-bearing activities and walking is fantastic for that. and inflammatory markers. And one of the papers that Nigel has circulated is one from Tuig, Bennett and Jones, that I had so involved with the UEA, looking at actually exercise in green space. And again, we don't really understand why, things like forest bathing, for example, but we know that actually being out in green space might be something called the old friends hypothesis, for what happens in nature for the not to say bacteria, but what sits underneath leaves, when bacteria and whatever is available in the natural landscape actually might be very good for inflammatory markers. And we can do this very easily by doing swabs on tongues and cortisol levels to see the effect that just being out in natural space has on us. So Morris and Hardman, as in the buses man, famously described really walking as being the nearest exercise activity to perfect exercise. So walking really is a best buy for public health. It's very convenient, it's low cost, it's accessible, very low risk. But I think then we have to start thinking about how do we actually do this walking? How do we encourage this? So are we talking about walking for transport or for leisure? And the money that you might put in, public money that goes into leisure, will tend to bring forward people who are already quite fit already, and will tend to bring forward your higher socioeconomic groups, and won't necessarily target your lower socioeconomic groups, your different demographics and your ethnic minorities. So are we thinking here, do we want to put our money into leisure, or should we be doing something at population level that cycling and walking become an important part of transport? Again, we think, should we be targeting at an individual level or at a population level? Again, a lot of these things we do at an individual level can be targeted and very good, but actually, a bit like the smoking campaigns, actually, if we work at a population level, we'll see much greater results. I put the little dragon here for something we call health by stealth. So things like, it was lovely seeing the dragons out around Norwich. It'll be the same with dinosaurs now, that you actually see people walking around and having a thoroughly enjoyable time, and they don't actually notice they're walking. So that's also one strategy. And I've shamelessly picked a bit from the Paston Footprints website as well. I hope you don't mind me doing that, because this is a lovely way of getting people to engage in the outside with an activity they're really enjoying doing. So they're there for the heritage, but actually they're putting in the step count and walking at the same time. So these are all very different ways of looking at walking. So a lot of my work has been involved with actually group walking. So again, this is very interesting, because when you get people out in a group, you tend to get health benefits over and above that you would get if a person went out on their own. And it's probably because when people are out in a group, we've found that they walk faster and they walk further, and they're just much more engaged than if they were out on their own. I mean, I think any excuse to go in or not go out if you're not highly motivated is very difficult, but this sort of habit formation of what you might do in a group and the sort of social obligations to others in the group to meet up with them means that group walking can be very effective. And so some of these results might look quite small, but actually they can have quite a profound effects on things that we're really interested in, like coronary heart disease and stroke. And again, the link to my paper on that is on here. So this is where just to start to wrap up in my final couple of slides, where are some of the cautions we want to think here? Well, this was another study I did when we gave participants cameras and they took photographs of things that were barriers to walking. And I know we've got a session on that later in August. But I think you have to be very cautious of the assumptions we make. I suspect on the call here, we've got people here who really enjoy walking. That's very different to being poor and having a couple of children in a buggy and not having a car and having no choices. And also this whole idea that I don't know walking's good for you. The gentleman who took this photograph lived in this street, which is opposite the beach in Great Yarmouth. He didn't go onto that beach, didn't know it was good for him. But he also said a bloke walking on a beach out there, so people are going to start asking questions about that, really. I'd also caution about how you set up some new interventions. So I was involved with evaluating the Walk Norwich scheme, which was also in was in Manchester, Birmingham, Leeds and Cambridge. And actually we really found this very problematic that you just set something up and you expect people to turn up. It just doesn't happen like that. And increasingly we're thinking really we need to think about how we mobilise community assets. So take a group that's already there, you know, like a dementia support group, or a learning disabilities group, or people you really want to help support to get more physically active, and think how can we support them by adding walks to things that they do. So a lot of my work is around what we'd call salutogenesis, That may well be a word you're not at all familiar with, but our focus is on what makes us well. And that might be that someone enjoyable aspects of walking, rather than always taking this idea of always thinking what's wrong with people. Let's think more about what makes them well. So my final slide, I just come back to this really, is to think the profound problem we have here and how important walking is because of the issue we have worldwide and a massive issue in this country on physical inactivity. Just think about if we're setting anything up, despite being very well intentioned, you can actually end up causing problems by widening inequalities, by not actually reaching those people who are the people who are in poorest health, who need it the most. And I'm really happy that to talk about that more in August when we have the Barriers to Walking event.
Fabulous, Sarah. Thank you very much indeed. I think that sets us off on a great path. I can certainly relate to what you said about walking in groups. Whenever I go out with my wife, I always end up walking about twice the pace I should normally walk. So I don't know whether that's a good thing or not with a person with my arthritis and so on. But anyway, there we are.
Absolutely, and very good for arthritis. Again, everyone says you should walk with arthritis. Not true. Nice one.
Excellent. Well, we'll move straight on. We have got time for questions after the third presentation. The second one is labelled Walking with Heritage, and I think it's fair to say this project, which is very current, was really the instigation of this session, really. So I'm very pleased to welcome Karen and Rob, who I guess between you'll be telling us about Paston footprints and also some of perhaps the walks that are coming up very soon. So over to you. You're both muted.
Not to do that. Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah, okay, thanks, Nigel. I'm going to kick off and then Karen will pick up. The Pastons, for those of you who don't know them, are one of Norfolk's famous, a little unknown to some families. We know a great deal about them because they wrote thousands of letters, which we have and we can read. When you talk about health, I suspect when they started in the 14th century, they didn't suffer from lack of exercise, but we know by the 17th century, Robert Paston was told by his doctor he needed to lose weight and take exercise, and actually gave him an exercise machine to work on. So we've got the whole scope there. The Paston letters give us a great insight into life in these centuries, life in Norfolk and life in England. And there are connections the Pastons have all over Norfolk. So there's no part of the county which can't have some sort of identification with the family. Our aim as a project was to bring this story to a wider audience. And when Karen and I sat down to do this, we realized after many hours of discussion that probably the two best ways we could do this is one, focus on characters, because there are lots of those that people can identify with. So people can have a way in to a very complicated story. And the other was we wanted place to play a part. So we looked at the places in Norfolk which have the biggest link to the Pastons by dint of how many references in the letters there are. We picked out 10 what we call hubs where we focused our walks. The walks were built around characters and the places. So the aim was there'd be plenty of material for walkers we could present that material to people as they walked in a different way. I mean, I have to say that these walks are really, we're just beginning with it. We're just beginning to realize, although we've mapped out, waymarked them and done a lot of work on them, we do appreciate that there's a huge amount more we can do, not only from health, but from tourism and other interesting angles, which I guess will go on, keep us busy for years to come. So there are 8 walks: Paston, Bacton, the Paston Way, which snakes through northeast Norfolk, Gresham, up near Holt, Oxnead, Blowfield, Mortby, and a fairly long walk through Norwich. Plus, we also added, because they were too far for people to walk, a couple of cycle routes as well, just for good measure. So that's the package we present, and I'll hand over to Karen to take it from here.
Thank you, Rob. Yes, our focus in our project is very much on the impact and effect of storytelling and how connection with that heritage story helps people walk in the footprints and have a sense of belonging and connection. But of course, heritage walkers, heritage trails are a particular demographic, and we wanted to open it up to audiences and people who don't usually participate in heritage. And we identified some different groups of people that we are targeting our walks towards. And on our website, pastandfootprints.co.uk, we give different routes and navigation in towards those walkers. So these people include people who are what we would call experienced Gen Z experience seekers. So Sarah mentioned that idea of the dinosaurs and the dragon walks, that sense of the young adults who might not necessarily want to go and find out about the Pastons, but who want some kind of experience. So what we do is we put them in the storytelling mode on these walks, whereby we have a Paston character act as the tour guide instead of your traditional historical tour guide. And then we open up the opportunity for them to take part in performances, to do material on YouTube performances. We've had people do games design online. We've got some young people working on zines at the minute. So they go for their inspiration on the walk, and they use that as a way to actually create something. We also identified explorer families as people who were searching in Norfolk for things to do. And so our walks cater specifically for families, whole intergenerational activities that they can do on the walks. And again, we've got a whole range of different resources, and we target specific walks that are suitable for short legs, suitable for buggies, and such likes. And we've had people out trialing our walks to help us understand what to do with these. But we also wanted to reach out to those wellbeing groups, because often they are the groups that the heritage sector as a whole do not always necessarily cater that well for. And yet there's been a turn within the heritage industry in the last few years towards this idea of creativity and creative expressions. So picking up on something else that Sarah mentioned, that idea of the relationship with inflammation, Edward Bulmer's book from 2019, The Inflamed Mind, which focuses on relationships between these bodily functions and depression, it started to make us think, well, how do we reach out to these well-being groups? And one of the things we recognize is that we have at our disposal a magnificent story which relates in lots of different cognitive and sensory ways to the landscape. And there's been much research on the well-being benefits of being out in nature and using your senses, mindfulness, meditation. And we thought, well, what about creating opportunities for people to experience our walks in multiple ways in the different seasons with different kinds of activities that link into this basis of research, and therefore tailor our storytelling in specific ways to the specific needs of different well-being groups, whether they're cognitive, sensory, and so on. So for instance, at the minute we have creative writing activities for people with no experience of writing. It can be something as short as a postcard through to thoughts on a page, promoting sensory activities, and but also we currently have a photography competition, and this is where we linked that sense of those well-being groups with the explorer families, with the heritage lovers, and also we've linked up with, I see they're here today, NCC's experience team for experiential tourists, and we thought that's the point, that's the key and the essence behind our walks. We need them to be experiential. And so at the minute we're running a photography competition. If anybody's interested in taking photographs, go on our walks. Weekly prizes linked up with experiential partners like Norfolk Museums, like the Sainsbury Centre for Visual Arts. Get people out there having confidence in expression, having confidence in exploration. All our walks are waymarked. Their Active Trails have given us accessibility audits. And so we want the people to feel like they're part of a community. This is something they can have the confidence to go off and do on their own, but they're also part of this wider experiential community. All of those resources and those windows into our walks can be seen on our website. I'll hand back to Rob.
Yeah. I think what we're really finding as well is that there are many levels, and picking up on Sarah's point about trying to find accessible ways in, different ways in for people. And we have a mnemonic which we're developing, which is Walker. So the W stands for well-being, and I won't go over that because Sarah's covered most of that. Activity, we try and offer different activities for walkers. Younger people might be doing a quiz, older people might be doing the creative work. Landscape, reading the landscape, Keepsakes for the K is trying to think of ways of taking a memory back from the walk, something you've seen, a photograph, a conversation. The environment, of course, nature, different environments, different seasons. And then the R is for reimagining. And I think that the power of that is we're exploring. We know about the ancestor effect, and we know that people who do family history draw great inspiration from the trials and tribulations of their ancestors. And of course, the Paston's trials and tribulations are very clearly there for us to read about. And it's also, I suppose, pushing towards this idea of finding a kind of coherence for people, to pick up on our walks and choose something that suits their position, their circumstances, and they can find a way in. So we're not there yet with that, but that is really where we want to be. Back to you, Karen.
Yeah, just a final word to say, we're here, we're open for suggestions. We're really hoping to collaborate with people who are exploring these kinds of areas. Just last week, we were working with teenagers who were creating Rosie's Plaques, if any of you know of Rosie's Plaques initiative, creating blue plaques for women. And they are now distributing, they're now up in Norwich, and they're going to go across to the different walks across the county. And that's the point. We want to find ways that people can feel they're taking part in the 21st century chapter of this Paston story that's lasted 600 years, that they're having a way to intervene and explore and be part of this sort of greater whole, no matter what background they come from, no matter what level of literacy they may or may not have, whether they're visual learners, whether they're experiential, whatever it might be, using those different kinds of ways in to connect and to feel part of a greater whole. And that's where we hope to pioneer and experiment much, much more. Thank you.
Absolutely fabulous. Thank you both. I mean, I really love the way that you've adapted the walks for different groups and you know, built in different activities. That seems to be a really strong feature to me, and no doubt people will have comments or questions on that when we get to that. I believe you've got some walks coming up, arranged walks, haven't you? Presumably people can find out the dates of those on your desk, your website, or maybe if you know them, you can put them in the chat perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah, website's on the chat.
Yeah, thank you very much, both of you. We'll come back to you shortly. Over to you, Andrew, my local vicar, who covers the Corston group of churches, including my own Havering Land. And I suggested to Andrew at a recent service that it would be good to hear from him, because I think the church walks idea, though I think quite simple, is very important. And Andrew, I think, will explain why it's very important. Over to you, Andrew.
Yeah, so let me give you some context to begin with. Through the last year and a half, churches generally, certainly churches on my patch, have been very active in responding to the pandemic that we found ourselves in the midst of. We've operated helplines in our villages. We've offered practical help with collecting shopping and all these things that we know about. We've also innovated with our offer. You know, we've gone online and we've learnt new skills. In a sense, we were in our element in that crisis management phase, because we do that kind of stuff quite well. But as the pandemic wore on, a few of us started to think about, well, what comes next? And I particularly was very conscious of what I perceive from central government messaging about how the pandemic has been handled. And I perceived, rightly or wrongly, that quite a lot of what was used by the government to help people do what they were asked to do was by engendering fear. Don't go out, because if you do, you'll catch COVID. Don't hug granny because you might kill her. You know, all of those kinds of glib bits of messaging, but which have stuck with us and stuck with me. We deal in our parishes with lots of vulnerable people who day to day struggle with anxiety and depression. And if you feed those kinds of personalities with very negative and fearful messaging, which says, don't go outside, it's a dangerous place. Well, what do when the messaging shifts? They can't just shift that fear. They can't move the anxiety onto a different place and say, okay, Boris says it's fine, so let's go for a walk again. So we thought that actually what we had a responsibility to do in this phase was to offer people a way to get outside and to do all the positive things that we've heard about already about walking, but in a safe way. And I don't just mean in a COVID safe way, because obviously being outside is as safe as we can be, but in a safe way in the sense that the walks are guided, and they're short, and they're in a place which is anchored in familiarity with one of the churches. So we put together just a short program of walks from each of my 6 churches. And we kind of say that they're going to be between 2 and 3 miles long. They will start and finish at the church, so you don't need to stress about finding the right place. The church will be open so that you could go in and have a few minutes if you wanted to enjoy the church as well. And that's the limit of the expectation. It's just turn up, walk together, and learn something potentially about the area of the church. And we've run 3 now. Each one has been attended by perhaps 7 or 8 people. I think I've been the only common person in all of the walks, which is interesting. I thought we might get a cohort that would travel around to the different places, but it seems that the majority of people who walk are of that place, of that parish, and want to know a bit more and explore their own patch. And there are a few who want to nosy on other people's patches. So we did one in Hayden, is one of my parishes. We did a Hayden walk a couple of weeks ago. And people came from Aylsham and Corston to that, because we were going through the estate on non-public footpaths and hearing a bit more about the history. And I suppose that's where I'd come to next. What's it been like? What's been the experience of doing these church walks? Well, they've all been very positive. They've been, as I said before, they've been led by somebody who's local. We've tried to do that in each case, to find somebody local who knows the local walking routes, who's willing to take us on one of their short loops. And inevitably, that means that the person who takes you knows about their area, and so will stop you and say, oh, just look through, can you see between those 2 trees? That's the place where the church in Ermingland used to stand. We think it was somewhere in that hollow. Now, you wouldn't get that even from a map, you know, because the remains of some of these churches aren't indicated on all the maps. So you need that kind of local connection in order to make that connection when you're walking together. There's also that opportunity to chat and to forge connections across our parishes. You know, the word parochial, we use it pejoratively, don't we? We say, oh, that person is so parochial, or they've got a parochial nature. Well, the Church of England is parochial by design. People gather around a parish, they gather around a church, a physical church in a physical place. And so there's that sense in which these walks aren't just random. They're walks which are located in a landscape. They relate to a set of physical features. And as such, even if you don't learn any quantifiable facts, just by walking the patch, lots of people will forge new kind of links between the geography and the topography, and say, oh yeah, I didn't realize you could get here from there, or I didn't realize this was so close to there. So there's been lots of that. There's been something of the local cultural context as well, you know, especially when we were in Hayden and in Alton recently, just learning about the history of the families in the big houses, you know, from the locals, and some of the gossip has been really quite illuminating. So as Nigel said at the beginning, what we're doing is really quite simple. It's just a walk, but the benefits are far more complex than just a walk. We feel like we're undoing a bit of that negative messaging. We're recovering some of people's enthusiasm for their daily walks, which we had back, you know, a year and a half ago, but we're giving it more focus, and that kind of group activity gives people a reason to come out. There are still, you know, when we planned these things, there were certain people in the parishes that I had in mind. Wouldn't it be good if they come along? This will be good for them. And some of those people we still haven't seen, which, you know, is intriguing, because that, you know, when you aim something at a particular constituency and they don't turn up, but other people do, you wonder whether your messaging is wrong, or or whether you've made a false assumption. So we've decided that we're going to continue this program. It was just a standalone 6 walks. We're going to roll them forward, keep exploring new areas, and, you know, do one every few weeks while the weather is reasonably predictable, and see where we get to. So that's me, Nigel.
Brilliant, thank you, Andrew. And I'm looking forward to the Havering Walk, which I think is next Thursday, isn't it? Next week. So
Indeed, next Thursday.
yeah, and I think I've put a post on our Facebook site, I think, Green Care Network, and no doubt, again, we can share the dates if people are interested in infiltrating the parochial walk.
People will be very welcome.
Thank you, Andrew. Brilliant. Well, we've got about 10 minutes, I think, for questions on those contributions so far. And I'm going to suggest, I did suggest we use the chat, but I think we're a small enough group to perhaps do this by holding your hand up. So if you'd like to put your video on, if it's off at the moment, or if you don't want to, that's fine. If you've got a question, just raise your hand and I'll bring you in. I'll kick off then. Something for you, Sarah. I was interested in what you said about, I suppose, active travel was the term that came to mind, and trying to, if you like, encourage people to walk to local things, and cycling as well is part of this plan, isn't it, within an urban context in particular. I don't know if everyone read the paper from Bicester that I circulated around, but I think that's very interesting because that struck me as being an attempt to create interesting but ordinary walks, you know, the day-to-day walks that people would do, making those more interesting, enhancing them in some way. Do you think there's a role for us to look at how we can make our sort of environments generally more interesting and walkable?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And I mean, I think we all got so much joy during the pandemic, didn't we? As soon as the roads were so quiet. Yeah. You know, I live on Unthank Road and I could walk down the middle of it. It was an absolute joy. But then...
Lost you, Sarah.
And, you know... I don't use my car a lot, but I'm cars again. And of course, that's, you know, in the UK, we're not capitalising the way that everybody hoped we would afterwards. So absolutely. And, you know, if you look at pictures of Amsterdam and Copenhagen back in the 70s, those sort of cities are absolutely crammed full of cars. This didn't
Danny, they've got the wrong date.
Sorry, there's someone chatting in the background. You know, it didn't happen. So people had to make some very hard decisions there. And then everyone looks and says, look at those lovely places when we're on holiday that we like that are so walkable. So I know Norwich Council and Norfolk County Council, and I have lots of conversations in the past with Active Norfolk as well. And of course, there's the Pedalways project, which is all about walking. So you connect up people's workplaces as well. And of course, active travel might mean that you do part of your route on a bus, but then you actually also walk part of it as well. So you might have multiple modes of transport on. But yeah, I mean, there's some beautiful areas to walk in Norwich. Even if it's quite functional walking to work, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have to be enjoyable.
Yeah, good. Question, Karen.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that conversation that you guys are having, and that sense that Andrew really picked up on, you know, that sense of the local and that idea of connecting with the local. With our marketing research, we explored what are the key search terms associated with people searching for walks in Norfolk. Now, that's a demographic who are keen to walk, so they're searching online. But words like discover and hidden and reveal came up high on the search terms. And I think that links to that sense of how can I, you know, connect, not just connect with the landscape around me, but actually be at the forefront of discovering, and that's the kind of experience and connection that you can get, that it seems to be something that's active for the whole body and mind. But people want to do that. People want to explore that on their home turf. It's that kind of thing. You go away for holidays and explore everywhere, but you never explore your own back garden. Yeah.
Questions or comments?
Can I say, Nigel, I've got my virtual hand up, but I'll raise my proper hand here. I really take on board what Sarah was saying, because I think if you're going to be doing trails and walks, you're to some extent talking to the preaching to the converted, although I think the Paston Footprints has done a lot to bring new entrants into this sort of area. But I think that the graph that Sarah brought up was really interesting, how in our everyday lives we're just doing less and less active participation in anything really, because we want things to be easy. And I think that with changing that mindset is a real challenge. And I think maybe starting with how pleasurable walks are, and how it can be incorporated in your daily life, like walking to school rather than taking the car to school or cycling to work. I think that's really where we're going to be making a difference.
Yeah, I mean, this links in, and Tim might want to come in here, but this links in very much, Tim, with your thinking about sustainable localism, doesn't it? Actually making things more accessible so we don't have to use the car and a whole pattern of life. Do you want to comment on that at all? You're muted, Tim.
Sorry, Nigel, I'm enjoying it. I'm also very delighted to see my colleagues in UEA, because those of you who are from UEA don't know that I was very much involved with UEA for a very long period of time, but I'm really interested in the idea of localizing nature more. We've got an opportunity which is really quite unique, and Nigel's been leading this with the formation of the whole of the Jubilee scheme coming up next year for the Queen's 70th Jubilee anniversaries, of actually creating new nature spaces throughout Norfolk on a parish basis. I very much like to get Andrew, because I think the church is very much likely to be part of this. The prime function, I think, of the Canopy project, which is about creating trees, planting trees. But actually, I'm much more interested in creating new natural spaces, and not necessarily recreating existing nature, but creating new nature, because climate change is going to make us want to create much more different natural areas than what we're used to, because they'll be resilient and robust for new worlds of activity and pollination. But the key thing is the linkage. Nature works best when it's joined up, as we all know. And what I'm really excited by what you're saying, all of you, is that these walks being connected across space in a whole host of ways. In fact, we can become quite safe and quite active over quite reasonably long periods, over say an hour's walking or even 2 hours walking, and in some cases longer than that. To give you an example, there's a very interesting project in the Chet Valley near Loddon called the Bee Project. There's something like 6 sites, all connected for pollinating bees, all connected by walking spaces, all roughly for a totality of an hour. Now, that's a wonderful opportunity for every kind of person in the area, whatever age they are, to enjoy a new natural world and actually be part of the process of creating new pollinating areas for a very endangered part of our biodiversity. I won't go on, but I think we have an opportunity, which I very much like to capture with you all, of making the Jubilee an opportunity for Norfolk new nature, which is much bigger than just the Canopy project, Nigel. And I think you're leading the way with the Green Care project. And I think the colleagues who are talking today are absolutely spelling out how potentially exciting that could be. And I'm very keen to take it further forward, as you know.
Yeah, that's great, Tim. Thank you very much. Did you want to come back on that at all, Andrew, or anyone else?
I mean, I would just throw in one of the things that the church is quite good at and has been good at historically is holding lots of local links together, often in the clergy, but also in church wardens and people who are established members of the community. And what I mean by that is having the ear of the local landowners, because it's one thing to spam the local landowners and say, yeah, we'd like you to come on board with this project and that project. It's another thing altogether when the vicar or the church warden says to the local landowner, have you thought about some more tree planting? Have you got any corners of fields which are hard to turn a combine in, which you really could use for something else, which would benefit everybody? And we're fortunate in my patch that we've got some good relationships with landowners, but I'm conscious that there are some landowners who are very difficult to reach. And I think there's a challenge for us all, really. It's how to persuade some of those landowners not just to think in terms of biodiversity and helping the environment, but also opening up a little bit and allowing permissive routes and maybe even new rights of way. Wouldn't that be great if there were a few more fields that we could cross? And I think that's one of those quandaries really which is out there, and we need to just keep trying from different directions to try and apply some pressure, because I'm just conscious there's so much of the countryside that we can't walk legally.
Absolutely. I think that's a very, very relevant point, Andrew. Again, Tim, with your background in terms of geography and the history of the countryside and so on, I mean, my generalization is that we live in an enclosed landscape compared to places like Devon with large open public accessible national parks and so on, even though we have the Broads, and we'll be hearing from Helen about the coast area of that outstanding natural beauty in a moment. We generally have problems in perhaps having enough public rights of way, public footpaths across what is otherwise private land.
Nigel, I'd hate to. I don't want to take. You got me going, and my colleagues.
Doesn't take much.
But just very quickly, can I just say some exciting things that could happen? One is we need to think of a developer levy, which is actually on the cards now, where money can go to landowners and to communities from development projects for this kind of new nature contribution. And I call it not a levy, because it's a word levy sounds like a tax and it's very negative in this modern debate. But if it's a contribution to the natural world and to the local community, and it adds both a place of safety and a place of joy and a place above all of exercise and well-being, then it really is a Jubilee commitment.
Yeah.
And I know that Bishop Usher, Graham Usher, who is the Bishop of Norwich, is very keen on this whole idea of opening up spaces with the church being actively involved, Andrew, which is why I'm very keen to hear your views on this. I can't tell you that there is a real opportunity for us to work with the local authorities, with the development community, to allow the kind of thing we're all talking about today to become much more widespread. We're going to be living in a world where we're not going to be using the car as much. We're going to be using carbon less over the next 10 or so years. Therefore, walking and being local is actually very much part of a low carbon living. And we must make it, make it joyful, make it full of health, make it full of goodness for each other. And walking in groups adds to all of those joys. So everything that's been said this afternoon is, from my point of view, absolutely exciting, but we can build on it. It's not stop where we're at.
Thanks, Tim. Robin, you had your hand up. We'll take this as the last question or comment, I think, before we move on.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's just actually to tell you, absolutely get enthused hearing about what people have been saying this afternoon. See, I work within the substance use field, and it's really about trying to find ways of engagement for all the things that people have said. People who've been quite marginalised. And probably had very, very limited opportunities to enjoy an outside space. And often the conversations I might be having with people, I'd like to get fit. How would you like to get fit? Join a gym. And actually it's to look beyond the joining the gym and looking to see what those opportunities could be. Absolutely echo everything that people say, the mindfulness, the walking alongside people, and the opportunity within that to look at a whole host of sense of community. So I'm just kind of really saying that I would be so keen to try and look at some of our members and some of our participants to engage in whatever the opportunities can be. It'd be fantastic. I'm really enthused by what I've heard. So yeah, thank you.
Great, that's lovely to hear, Robin. Thank you very much. We'll move on if that's all right. And can I introduce Laura Drysdale, Director of the Restoration Trust, and her colleague John Durrant. I think you're a beneficiary, I think is the right way of describing this, John, of the restoration programme. Is that right or not? No, I don't know. What do you do, John? Introduce yourself.
I do a bit of everything. I sit on their trustee board of expertise as well. And the Restoration Trust has given me something back that I've not had for a long time, so I want to give back.
Great. Well, we'll hear more from you perhaps in a moment. Laura, are you going to kick off?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Laura, I'm Director of the Restoration Trust, and I'm here with John, and John will tell you more about himself. I must say I'm super pleased to see Robin here because he used to be my boss at Julian Support. And Robin, we can do things with the Matthew Project. You've just got to ask. So what I'd like to do is, so the Restoration Trust does what we call culture therapy for people who are living with mental health issues. And our two main areas of activity are historic landscapes and archives. And so one of our historic landscape projects has been Borough Castle Almanac, where we walked at Borough Castle with a group, and that went on for more than 2 years, and John will tell you more about that. And I've got Borough Castle behind me, and Rachel said that it's one of her favourite views, and I agree. What I'd like to do is just quickly play you a clip from a film that a filmmaker called Julian Claxton made about Borough Castle, and I think John's going to put the link for that in the chat. But yeah, if that's okay with you, I'll just share this little clip. If there's problems with the share, just let me know. Sometimes the sound doesn't come out or something like that.
You're not judged for what you have or who you are as a person. You can just come here and relax and talk. But we're further away from the roads that you don't hear cars, and you just hear water. And there's something really peaceful about silence.
There have been so many new experiences that I would never ever have done.
We support each other through the good times, through the bad times.
It's definitely the people that make the group. They're just so inviting and they just include you so much and they just make you feel welcome.
The best thing for me is kind of being outdoors, because I have been a bit of a shut-in, to be honest, but just being outside, seeing new things I didn't even know about it's just great. Something that I needed to do for myself to be a happier person.
It's a different way to de-stress. This one group has given me, I would say, confidence in other groups and given more things a go with the community.
No one cares what you are. They take you for what you are, not what people think you are.
It has been very life-changing for me. It has helped boost my well-being, my confidence. You feel part of something and you grow together. You experience each other's ups and downs together in a friendly, safe, caring environment.
Being part of the Borough Castle project is that you're not judged and you're accepted for who you are. I never thought I would be involved in a project like this, but it's given me my connection back to the nature and my connection back to connecting with people again.
So that's an excerpt from our film, and I'm going to hand over to John now. Oh, sorry about this.
So I'm going to give you a little bit of a background story before I started the project. I was living in Suffolk in Brampton, and I didn't drive, but my partner does. But I started to get very isolated, and I was isolating myself from general public and all sorts. I got offered to go on this project 2018, I think it was, and the first session I went to, I enjoyed. But when I come home, because of my mental health, I was like, I don't really know if that's for me. I don't know if it's for me. All my negative thoughts come crushing in and stuff like that. So I was speaking to my partner. I'd made this decision that I wasn't going to go again. But I spoke to my partner and she said, no, give it another go and we can go from there. So I went again and I went again. And then I went again. I found myself not being judged because of my mental health, but the support group that we were there within each other was growing every fortnight. It was growing, and we'd have different specialists come in, the butterfly man, geologist man. We had the wildlife expert, wildflowers from Sam Brown. I didn't think I'd enjoy stuff like that, but I come away and I felt absolutely buzzing because none of that had made me, I've not felt like that in years. But this project has given me something back. And as I said in the film, it gave me my connection back to nature, but also connect them back to people. I've done blogs on certain events that we've done on it. And I've done podcast with Laura at the beginning, because that's what I do. I'm a blogger and podcaster for mental health, sharing my own experience. But just being out in that nature, and it's mind-blowing what nature can do for you. I don't like walking. I hold my hand up. I'm a big guy. I don't like to walk miles. We probably do about 3 miles. I haven't counted it all, but what you get in that 3 miles is absolutely amazing. It's beautiful. Seeing all the wildlife, the different smells of the flowers as you go past, the talking with the groups, and people that are not a part of the group, as they come past you on the boardwalk or up on the site, and they say thank you or hello to you, thank you for letting them pass. That just gives me a little bit of a smile and a little bit of a confidence growth, so I start walking with a taller back. But after the project started to come to the end after its 2-year initial period, and I and some of the group said to Laura, we need to continue this somehow we can. And I was Laura's pain in the arse, basically. I kept on at her, I kept on at her, and I kept on at her. When can we get the money to apply for this money that we can go for to keep it going? I just wanted to get the project going because I knew how beneficial it was for me, but also the other groups in the member, because we're seeing them grow from there, and we're seeing them grow big with all the different stuff we've done. So we're now called the Borough Castle Almanac. I can never say that word. Almanac Group Experience, and we won some pot of money to carry the project on. And we want to show our film. We want to go into places and say, look, this is what you can do with a project. There's so many different things you can do. We've done art, and Laura will tell you, I'm the first one to start cursing about art and crafts because I absolutely hate it, but I get it done because the sense of pride I get, and the courage. Everyone's laughing with me because I'm cursing it, but the sense of pride you get to do that project, and you walking around it's just amazing. I can't thank what the Restoration Trust gave me in them 2 years, and then they've given me back. I will always be grateful for the Restoration Trust for what they've given to me. So if there's anything else, Laura.
I think it is. Thanks, John. I think it's worth saying that in the group now that John's one of the leaders of, that we've got a Heritage Open Day walk on Tuesday, the 14th of September, if anybody would like to come along. And also, I'd just like to flag up John's role as well that he hasn't said, which is that he's on the transformation panel, aren't you, John? Do you want to say what it is? So
I'm on the transformation and mental health board for the CCG for Norfolk and Waveney as a reference group committee. There needs to be change, and I hope that I can bring that change with the other people I'm working alongside, because there needs to be change. And I think there's projects like the Restoration Trust and some projects I've heard about, Footprints, and I follow them on Twitter, that do a lot more than just putting these events on, should be getting the money that the trust is getting. Don't even get me, that's a whole new subject. Don't even get me started on that one.
Thanks, John. I don't think I've really got anything to add, Nigel. Perhaps people could ask us any questions at the end.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you both. I mean, a fabulous example of using a walk as a hook to hang so much else on, really. I think that's what the message I get from this. We labelled this the importance of place, the meaning of place, and the place obviously becomes very, very central to people that are making the walk. But as John has said so articulately, it brings so much more with it, which is fantastic to hear. So thank you both. We move on to what might actually be our last presentation, because I see that Gareth, who we were due to have from Active Norfolk, doesn't appear to have appeared. So my apologies for that. I've had no indication of any problems, but so I will say a little bit about what I think and what Gareth might have said at the end, and we'll see whether we can perhaps include him in our next network shop, which is towards the end of August. So without further ado, hand over to Helen from the Norfolk Coast Partnership. And Helen, I think you've got a specific responsibility for walks within the partnership, and you're going to tell us a bit about your approach within the partnership and obviously the area of outstanding natural beauty. So special landscapes, over to you.
Hi everybody. I'm actually going to turn my camera off because I've got great reception. So if soon as I put on my presentation, I will disappear if not. So I'm sorry about that. If I can, hold on, bear with me. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, bear with me 1 second, sorry. Sorry about this, Nigel. I'll be with you in 1 minute. Just having a bit of a technical problem. Got 2 screens open and it's just getting a bit messy. Hold on. Sorry, everybody.
No problem, take your time.
It's so embarrassing.
It looks like progress.
Okay. Can everybody see that this time?
Thanks, yeah, perfect.
Okay, good. Right, so basically, I didn't know who was going to be at the meeting for a start. So you're going to have to forgive me because I'm going to have to introduce what exactly the area of outstanding natural beauty is, because I wasn't sure who was going to be here and kind of how much you were aware. So basically, let me just show you a map. It's actually a very wide area, and it's the main coastal strip at the top that you can see there stretches from Old Hunstanton to just outside Bacton, and you can see there's 2 outlying areas. So on the west, basically the western outlier comes within 2 miles of King's Lynn and takes in part of Sandringham, including the house actually, and Dersingham Bog. And then the eastern outlier begins at Seapawling and goes all the way down to Horsey, down to Winterton, sorry. And actually Horsey is the only place within in the country that actually has 2 designations. So it's part of the national park, obviously, but also part of the AMB as well, which is really interesting. So the designation covers 453 square kilometres. There's 69 parishes and 91 kilometres of coastline, and critically 195 miles of public rights of way, which is huge. So it was originally designated in 1968. So the statutory purpose of the designation is to conserve and enhance the natural beauty of the area. So that comprises of the area's distinctive landscape character, its rich biodiversity and geodiversity, historic and cultural environment. But also there are 2 secondary statutory purposes. Number 1 is to take account of the needs of agriculture, forestry, fishing and other you know, all local industries basically, and the social needs and economic needs of local communities. But also the second one is to meet the demand for recreation and to basically increase the understanding and the value of people and the care that they take in the area. So the special qualities that we actually exist for are the dynamic character and geomorphology of the coast, the links between the land and sea, the diversity and integrity of the landscape, seascape and settlement character, and the distinctive, very distinctive biodiversity and habitats, the important geology, and less so at the moment, the sense of remoteness, tranquility and wildness, and its rich archaeology and heritage and history. So the partnership was originally created in December 1991, which was initially to focus on the pressures on the area, which were arising from increasing numbers of visitors, which were perceived as having a damaging effect on the area's natural beauty. So now we've got around 20 partners, whereas at the moment, as a staff team, there are only 6 of us, and all of us work part-time. So together, we're looking at about the equivalent of just under 4 staff, four full-time staff. So in 2018, I don't know if any of you are aware of this, but I would think that you are. The Glover, Julian Glover, was given a brief to review national parks and AONB's statutory purpose and their alignment with the government's 25-year environment plan. So that came about as basically the 2016 State of the Environment report advised that the number of SSSIs in unfavourable and recovering condition were increasingly rapidly since 2012, whether or not they were in a designated landscape, basically saying it made no difference whether they were in a designated landscape, and it really should have done. So the review sets the expectation that the landscape should ensure resilient ecosystems and flourishing wildlife. So the results of the review were published in late 2019 and contained 27 proposals under the following headline, under the headlines that you can see on the screen. So I won't go into all of them, but some of the key ones for this particular group that might be of interest are basically that there are proposals to recommend an address of the lack of diversity in users of the landscape, and an increase in active initiatives for the nation's health and well-being. Connecting people more to the landscape was deemed as being absolutely necessary, and more coordinated public transport and more sustainable access, and an aspiration that every child has a night under the stars, which is just fantastic, and hopefully we'll see that come to fruition. Oh, bear with. So that is really the introduction, but I'll now talk about what Nigel actually asked us to talk about, which was our walking offer. So nearly 10 years ago, which was way before I actually joined the Norfolk Coast Partnership, they received funding to develop 10 web-based walks, which would give inspiration for sustainable days out in the area. So the routes were carefully chosen due to there being, well, due to them being great walks, because let's face it, if it's not a good walk, why would anybody want to go on it? They are all accessible by public transport, and they offer the opportunity to enjoy the varied landscapes of the area. So they were chosen specifically for something specific that they offered. They were all slightly inland and showed that the area is more than just the coastline, which is what people forget sometimes. And as such, these routes also offer quiet and tranquility. And that's because of that, actually, we've been able to promote them quite significantly over the last year. They've proved to be really, really popular during COVID. So the information is designed in a particular format, which was worked really well, actually, and we've had great feedback about it. So there is a preparatory information sheet, which you can see on your screen, on how to get there by public transport, where the tea and cake shops are, you know, how long it should take, the terrain and any major hills, just so that people know what to expect, how to plan for their trip. And then the second one is along the way, kind of what things are there to look out for, you know, particular aspects of the landscape or heritage sites, things of interest, basically. And then number 3 was the walk instruction. So critically, you know, not as the routes, not waymarked as circular routes or anything. So which turn to take at what point, etc. And then finally, as a handy map of the route. So you can download those from our website. They've been updated over the years and are audited annually to make sure the information is up to date, apart from last year actually. So, but they're being updated very shortly. So we're actually in the process at the moment of getting a new website, which is due to be launched in the next few weeks. And those walks and other walks that we've got, so we've got accessible walks as well, which I'll go on to in a minute, will be far more accessible for everybody on this website. So I don't know if you can see, but there's actually a little person, a little blue person on, can you see that? On the top left of the page. So that's actually an accessibility button and will include options for a screen reader, text resizing, background color, etc. So I mentioned we've got 14 accessible walks also that were based on the easy access on the Norfolk Coast OMB guide that was also part of external funding, which basically there's greater information on those walks with regards to path surface, gradients, etc., and specific hazards. So they are actually accompanied by images, which are often the easiest way to explain what something is like, what a path surface is like, and so that people can understand exactly what they're expecting. So basically, there's lots of walks on our website, and there's our website. And as I'm sure somebody else has already mentioned today about Norfolk Trails, there are lots more brilliant walks at Norfolk Trails, including accessibility walks, etc. But I just also want to take the opportunity to say a few more words as well. We undertook a survey last year during COVID as part of our work. Well, basically, we're going to be updating our transport strategy for the Norfolk coast. And this survey proved to be really popular, and it evidenced the huge amount of people that took up walking and cycling in the area. I mean, I'm not to say that that's exactly the same all the way across Norfolk, but I've got a feeling that it is. That took up walking and cycling during the lockdown, specifically the initial lockdown, which really did force people to explore their local areas further and more profoundly than probably they've had a chance to before. And as part of that survey, we asked people what would encourage them to walk or cycle more. And 53% actually, so that was 402 people that answered that particular question, said that further information locally, available locally, not necessarily online, locally where they can see it, about where they could actually walk was what they wanted. So that's something that we'd actually heard before from some of the parishes that we work with, and we're going to be working along with the parishes in the area to look at this information provision, and where they no longer exist, you know, the possible reintroduction of the old parish map boards with some further information on public transport, other services for locals and for the tremendous amount of visitors that we are seeing on the coast at the moment. So on that note also, unfortunately, a large percentage of the people that undertook the survey said that after the restrictions were lifted, that they felt that there were so many visitors to the area that they no longer felt safe walking on many of the routes that they had discovered locally. So either they found that they were having to walk at different hours of the day than they were accustomed to, so early morning, late evenings, or in fact that they were actually getting in their car and driving further away to find inland walks away from the busy hotspots, which kind of defeats the object of everything that we've been working towards. But if I could just say, really interesting, and I agree with what Andrew was saying about the lack of permissive routes. That's something which hugely came out of the survey as well, particularly with regards to bridleways, as there are not many of them that are joined up together. And obviously, if you've got a bridleway, you've then got access to for cyclists and for walkers potentially too. So we're hoping that with the introduction of the ELM, so the Environmental Land Management Scheme for farmers, and with a fund that we've just been granted actually through DEFRA, which is the Farming in Protected Landscapes, or FIPL, as the very lovely acronym is, will help resolve that, which, you know, the whole idea being public money for public goods, and, you know, we want to make sure that access is up there basically. So further than that, we'll be working on active travel as well with Norfolk County Council. We work very closely with them as part of our transport strategy, and looking at walking and cycling and public transport as a whole, and kind of how they can be better coordinated, better linked in together to make the AONB an easier place to get around on foot and by bike. And we all know, you know, it's not basically people that come, visitors that come on holiday are more likely to trial new things. They're more likely to walk and cycle than they would do probably at their home. So if we can get them while they're here to walk and cycle, and, you know, for them to find out how easy it is, then hopefully they'll be able to take those practices home with them too. So that's me.
Fabulous, Helen. Thank you very much indeed. That's really interesting. I'll just, if it's okay, just briefly summarise, I think, what Gareth was going to say. And it will be brief because I don't understand all the detail of what he's doing. And hopefully we can get some more information which we can pass on to in some way. But basically, Gareth was going to be talking about Active Norfolk's development of what they're calling an activity finder, which is going to be an online directory, I guess is the right way of describing it, of walks, but also other opportunities for physical exercise around the county. And I do know that they're very keen to include sort of information you've just referred to, Helen, on public transport, whether there are accessible toilets nearby, and all that other information that's so important in order to make people, I suppose, enable people to feel whether that walk is for them and their particular circumstances and so on. As I say, I do apologise for his absence. I've got no idea why he's not with us, but we'll catch up with him at some point. So it leaves us about 10 minutes, I think, for further questions and discussion, which is very helpful. I was particularly interested, well, there's so many questions that come to mind. Perhaps I can kick off again with you, Helen. I mean, I was fascinated with what you said about the research at the end, and particularly, I suppose, the issue of managing numbers. That if you advertise a limited number of walks, particularly in areas that are very popular with tourists, then it's perhaps not surprising that locals feel a bit sort of muscled out, if that's the right phrase. What are your thoughts on that? Is it part of this wider county-wide approach to making more places walkable and accessible? Is that the answer?
I think the answer is actually drawing people away from the hotspots. And I mean, we have got so many walks in Norfolk. We are so lucky. I mean, Norfolk Trails, I mean, I don't know if you know, but I actually worked for Norfolk Trails before I came to the Norfolk Coast Partnership. And so I know for a fact that there are literally hundreds of walks, of circular walks around the county, and that people can be drawn to. It's just really a matter of promotion and people knowing that they exist, and kind of things that people might be looking for along the coast exist along the river corridors. You know, there are fantastic views and the opportunity to enjoy nature and everything that we all want from a walk, but people don't necessarily know how to access those or where they are. Yeah. But there's a huge amount of resource, but it's just getting to that resource, yeah. Sending people in the right direction.
So the activity finder is I guess one way of pulling all that information together, albeit, again, it poses its own issues, doesn't it? Because it's basically online, and as you've said, that's not accessible to everyone. So no. I was particularly interested in what you were saying about the old parish map and having a lot of local signage that enables people in hard copy with perhaps leaflets or whatever, just to do their local area, but a bit more informed and enhanced way. Patricia, you had your hand up.
Thank you. Yeah, I was really interested in that. You said about the local people had to go further afield in the summer, and that was a real issue, especially after lockdown, when we were finally let out and we were able to visit Horsey or wherever, or Winterton, wherever it might be, and living in that area. I can fully sympathise. The one sort of bright thing on the horizon is the Experience project is promoting off-season tourism, which is really good for the economy, because we want to bring in money in when it wouldn't necessarily be coming in from tourists. But also we're specifically directing people away from those honeypots, so we're not going to be mentioning the seals at Horsey, or we're not going to be mentioning the other places where people tend to congregate.
Exactly.
I think that's really interesting to bear that in mind, and I think that is recognised and acknowledged, and we're doing our best to address that.
Yeah, we are working with you guys as well.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And the other project, I guess, that comes to mind is Greenways to Green Spaces, which I know the County Council is leading on again, and that's that going back to the earlier discussion about trying to link green spaces with footpaths, particularly the long distance footpaths, isn't it? So there's a lot of work going on, I think, at county level, is my impression, to join all this up. Is that a fair comment, would you say?
Absolutely. I have regular conversations with Matt Hayward about this and about our transport strategy and kind of how to take this forward, actually, because we've got so much information now, and we've got a lot of information on a very local level as well, which is so important, because that's exactly what we should be doing. We're a repository for all of this information about our area, so yeah, we are feeding it to the county as well, so that it goes into their plans.
Brilliant. Any further questions for Helen, or indeed for Laura or John? I mean, I've got one or two for Laura and John if no one else has, but anyone else first? Okay, Laura and John, I think I'm right in saying, obviously you've mentioned Burr Castle. I can't remember whether you mentioned Cater St Edmund, but I think you've done a similar project there. Do you have any ambitions or plans to do projects elsewhere?
I'll let Laura answer that. You're on mute, Laura.
Oh, thanks, Nigel. Thanks, John. Yes, we've got a pilot project starting at Caster. It doesn't actually start until the 25th of August. Anyone who's living in Norwich and has got a serious mental health issue, if you know of anybody, then get in touch with us, because that's what that project's aimed for. It's only a pilot, so it's I think it's a 5-session pilot. Yeah, we're continually planning new projects and new things to do. We also have a group called Like Minds Norfolk, where we meet and have jaunts in Norfolk for people to enjoy their own county, and so that involves walks and other experiences like that.
Great. It sounds like Robin's interested as well from the Matthew project, so there's some potential further discussions to be had there, which is great. I'm also conscious that we've got a couple of people here that are specifically involved in working with people with dementia and their carers. Gordon and Rachel, you're both with us, I think, still. Rachel from the Monument Project and Gordon from Dementia Adventure. I wondered whether either or both of you have got any sort of observations to make on what you've heard today from your perspective and the projects that you're beginning to work on. Would you like to come in at all? No? Yeah, Gordon.
Well, no, thank you. I mean, I'm really excited by joining the Monument Project and working with the council. And obviously, it sounds as if there's so much going on. What I'm really heartened by is by the range and the opportunity of maybe connecting with you, because obviously we've been commissioned to run support for family carers, to look at the barriers based on the Monument Project and the research they've been doing about the barriers to getting outdoors and connecting with nature, which is our specialty at Dementia Adventure. But we're going to be then running training for them. But part of the training that we're going to be delivering is also working with the spaces and the organisations that are running these opportunities to then help you connect together and to provide you with some training and dementia support training. So I'm really looking forward to getting to know you more in the future, because it sounds really exciting, particularly with formal organisations, but also with churches. And the church project sounded so great. And if that could actually be developed into other parishes, that would be a really exciting opportunity too, to provide localised support all over Norfolk.
Thanks, Gordon. Rachel, did you want to come in at all? No, I'm assuming Rachel's there. Maybe not. Okay. Just to say that I think at our next session in late August, Rachel, I know, is going to be contributing something about the Monument Project, so we won't steal her thunder today. And Gordon, I think you're planning to come to that as well, hopefully. So you'll be able to say something about a bit more about perhaps the barriers that you've referred to, because that session is very much focused on trying to remove some of the barriers to accessing nature that affect different groups of people in different ways.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thanks. I'm conscious we're coming up to 5:30, so unless there's anything else that people want to ask or raise, I'll just wrap up the session if that's all right. First of all, thank you all very much for attending, and thank you particularly to all those that have contributed today. I found it really interesting, and as we've seen, I think if you looked at the chat, there are some interesting connections being made through that, which I think, you know, testimony to the value, if you like, having this sort of session and enabling those connections to be made. I will be sending round to all the participants a copy of the chat and also a link to the recording, which will be on YouTube, and I'll also post that link on our website, so it's more generally available to people in the network and beyond. The other thing I would mention, and it really is nothing more than to say that if anyone is interested in taking this forward, then let me know. As some of you will know, on other occasions when we've held these sessions, there's been a sort of a critical mass, if you like, of interested people who want to take either discussions or development ideas further. And they've developed into what we call special interest groups. We've got two of those at the moment, one covering interacting with animals, and the other one which is called Place Perfect, which is very much about developing more livable, if you like, town and urban environments, both in terms of new development, but also in looking at existing towns and villages and doing some of the things we referred to earlier, making them less car friendly, more human friendly, more green space, active travel and so on. Now, if there's say a group of you that would like to carry on the discussion in that sort of format, all I would ask is someone who's prepared to sort of take the lead and coordinate that would be great. I'll mention that in the follow-up email. If not, no problem. Obviously, there are some useful connections being made through the chat, and that might be enough. I don't want to press the point, but the option is there. If you like, the model is being developed. If you want to take this forward in a more collective way, then very happy to support that. So unless I've missed anything, thank you all very much again, and I'll be in touch with the follow-up information. And have a good.
Thank you, Nigel, so much for all that you do to make this thing possible and bring us together. You're really a great man. We need to say that to you.
Thank you very much. That's appreciated, Tim. We'll be in touch. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye-bye now.
Thanks very much.
I agree. Thanks very much. These things take a long